Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for my fourth and final card in my series One Stamp 4 Ways. Here is the card I'm going to be creating today. I'm using some Finetec watercolors to create this elegant card. Here is the stamp that I've been using by Penny Black. It's called Burst of Blooms. And here are my Finetec watercolors. I just have a set of 12 pearl colors. I'm going to start by putting a piece of black cardstock. It's 3 inches wide in my MISTI, and I'm going to position my stamp at the bottom here. And notice I've removed the foam piece because this already has foam in the stamp. I'm going to ink this up with some Versamark ink and then stamp it down onto my black cardstock. And then I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle some white embossing powder on here and heat it to set it. I want to cover this whole strip, so I'm going to put it back into the MISTI. And I don't want to clean my stamp, and I did this in my last video. I'm going to take my grid sheet and put it on top of my cardstock, and I'm going to put my Creative Corners, just a magnet on top of it to hold it down. And that way I can take my stamp and position it without getting any of the Versamark that's already on there onto my cardstock, and then I just clean my grid sheet afterwards. So once I get my stamp positioned, then I can just remove, just make sure I keep that black in place. And then I can move off my grid sheet and just clean that separately. And I'm going to ink this up again with the Versamark ink and then stamp it down. And then I'll again sprinkle this with some white embossing powder and heat it to set it. Now I'm ready to go for my watercolors. Here is my set. And then I've created a sample panel here. You can see how beautiful these pearl colors are. I'm using the silver and blue all the way to the left. And I'm using this Low Cornell brush. It's called 7000 round. It's just a really tiny brush so I can get into the small areas. So I have a jar of water off to the side here that you can't see. So I'm just dipping my brush into the water, and then you kind of have to work it a little bit because these paints are like completely solid. So you kind of work the water in and it starts to thicken up and it just goes on beautifully. You could use more water to get more of a kind of a translucent look, or if you use less water, this paint gets really thick, actually, almost like an acrylic, and it goes on pretty solid. So I'm using a pretty small amount of water so that I get a really kind of thick look on my paper. Notice that I removed that water from my brush, and that's to make sure that it doesn't kind of drip down my brush and onto my cardstock. So I'm always careful of that. And I think it helps to just dip the brush part into your water jar rather than dipping the whole entire brush plus handle. Okay, so I did the two large flowers with this blue color, and notice that I kept the edges of those petals black. For the rest of my flowers, I'm using the silver. You can see how thick this is going on. It looks so pretty in real life because it's got this beautiful pearl shimmer to it. I decided to keep this card pretty simple with color, so I'm not going to go in with a bunch of different colors to do on the petals and the greenery on the stems. I'm not doing any of that, so I'm just using the blue for the large flowers, and then I'm using this silver on all of the other petals. So I just went ahead and fast forwarded to the end here since it's just some simple coloring. Now my panel here is 3 inches wide on purpose so that I could figure out where the best area is to cut. So I'm going to cut it down to 2.5 inches. So here are all my pieces. I have a Neenah card base, and then I have some smoky slate cardstock that's 5.25 inches high. So I have 1/8 of an inch at the top and the bottom. And then I also cut 1/8 of an inch from the top and the bottom of my panel. I'm pulling my sentiment from the Big Greeting Set by Simon Says Stamp. But before I stamp it, I'm going to adhere my flower panel to my smoky slate with some ATG tape runner. And I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch on one side before I adhere that panel, just so that I can have some of that smoky slate on the left-hand side. And I'm going to put this in the MISTI, and I'm splitting up my sentiment. I do this a lot. I've seen people cut their stamps. I really don't like to do that, so I'm going to mask off part of it, and I'm being a little lazy. I usually use some surgical tape, but I just put a Post-it over the part I did not want to stamp and inked it up with some VersaFine black onyx ink. So I'm going to do the bottom word first so I can build up from there. So I'll stamp that down. You can see I had positioned it ahead of time to be right in that small area. And now I'm going to do the and I just got 2 Post-its. I'm holding them down with one hand. I'm being really careful. I know this is kind of a risky thing here, but it seemed to work out okay. I'm just being really careful not to get any smudges anywhere. And then finally I have my word love, which I've positioned. I'm going to ink that up finally and stamp it down. I really love the VersaFine black onyx ink for sentiments. It gives you a really crisp word. So I'll stamp that down, and then I'm going to take this panel, put some ATG on the back of it, and then put it onto my Neenah Solar White card base. So I have that white at the top and the bottom just to add that little extra frame. And that is the card for today. So I hope you enjoyed this series. I think this one might be one of my favorites. It's such a shimmery, beautiful card. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.